Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week, we're going to kick off our Pedro Almodóvar Festival with 2002's Talk to Her.
Let's dive on in. All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see/hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what?
Find good media, Sherlock.
That is absolutely
good
right.
Good to see you today. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you, too. So, new festival. This was your idea to do Pedro Almodóvar. His is a name that I've seen out there, obviously, since the 80s. Yeah. I mean, he was one of these kind of indie darlings, like back in the day, like back in the mid to late 80s, early 90s.
Definitely like an inspiration for people like Robert Rodriguez, I think. Even though he's more of a horror, I guess, guy, but still like any famous Spanish director coming up, I think was really important from, and there's so many South American, or Mexican or a variety of Spanish actors or directors that are out these days are winning Oscars also.
Totally.
Right?
And I also think it's really worth noting that Almodóvar, has been such an important integral piece of queer filmmaking too, since back in the 80s. Like he had lead characters in his movies who were gay, who were trans, who were drag queens. He dealt a lot with drug addiction and AIDS and things of this nature in his filmmaking at a time when like that shit was not being done at all.
Yeah, no.
And so and so in a lot of ways, I feel bad that I'm like
same here, and that's kind of why I wanted to get to him, because he's someone I've always heard of. I've only seen this movie that we're doing today was the only one of his, and it just felt like an education that I wanted to get more, and then we could share that with the audience as they play along and learn about Almodóvar. I think what we're gonna say in this first film, and maybe it's film dependent, but I think how we view him from this first movie, we may be viewing him very differently by the fourth movie. So I'm interested to see.
I agree. I totally agree, because I know, like, after I watched the movie, I started kind of scratching at the surface about him and finding out. I mean, again, 2002, pretty late into his filmography, considering that he started in, I want to say, 1982.
And what else are we doing? We're doing Volver, The Skin I Live In,
as well as Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, which I think Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down would be one of his very first kind of breakout films, and I'm pretty sure that's an early Antonio Banderas.
Okay.
I'm pretty. Don't quote me on that. If it's not, I'll take this out. But yeah. So I mean, and I think that again, if you think back to the days when Sundance was something that you had to get the big old floppy newsprint of it, right, at the local like bohemian coffee shop, and you would get the big floppy newsprint, and you'd be like, what's coming, and you have to like flip through it.
Yeah, you got a big booklet.
Yeah, Almodóvar, that's like one of those names where it was like if his movie was in there, you were checking it out.
So I'm with you. I feel bad in a way as well that I just don't know enough about him, so let's learn about him. Yep. I always love doing foreign directors as well. I think that's super intriguing and needs to be heard in the voice of American pop culture and movies.
Totally, because I think that the even just less so with this movie, but with Volver, I don't know, is it Volver?
I think so.
With that one in particular, some of the influences, I went down some rabbit holes of like what was influencing him, and I was like, shit, man, I barely know about any of this stuff.
Yeah, I didn't.
So he's a crazy film buff, but not thinking about like, American noir films or something that we have a lot of resonance with. Instead, it was international stuff. And it's going to be really exciting. So I'm really excited.
Super excited to get into this. This movie, Talk to Her, 2002, like you said, a little later in his filmography. This is a weird watch, for sure. And I could definitely see how someone may not be into it, because it gets pretty dark.
Yeah.
And it goes places, but he kind of does that in all of his movies. From what I can tell, like there's dark little corners in all of his movies. And there's a variety of things that I can already tell watching this movie are kind of his style, his thing, like his trademarks. The first one that came to mind when watching some of his films is that he loves performances, like inside of the movie. Yeah. Right. Whether like I think the beginning of this one starts like a play.
Yeah.
And there's the curtains, and you draw up the curtains, and people are acting. We're watching a theater production, but you don't know what it is at first. It's really odd.
This movie takes its time so much. And I think that is, first of all, I find that to be brilliant. I love being able to feel like that the director starts off with the assumption that I'm smart.
Yes.
Right? Like that the director from the get-go is like, you're not an idiot. You don't need a car crash to open this movie.
That's a great point. Yes.
We're going to watch two men watching a sort of improvisational, like, dance recital, right? And all we're going to do is watch that one of the men starts crying, right? And that ends up being a deeply pivotal place for this movie to start, but it feels so auspicious, right? And actually the movie itself, the period of time that it takes before our four central characters, which is a funny thing to say once we start to dig into who our four central characters are.
Sure.
But to get those four central characters together in one room where we go, oh, this is what this movie is about, takes 35 minutes, 40 minutes, if not longer, to get those characters into one room where we go, okay, now we're hitting the road. Like, this is what this movie's about. Everything before that, part of the enjoyment of watching it is twofold, I feel. One is, where the hell is this headed?
Yeah.
Right? And because, just to lay it out,
sure,
we have two
guys that just have odd kind of relationships with these women, comatose women.
So even before we get to that point, though, that's when our crossroads meet, where we suddenly realize what this movie's about.
Yeah.
Before that, the first quarter of the movie is we have a reporter who gets very emotional when he sees certain kinds of art.
He's a very emotional person.
He's a very emotional person who is enamored with a woman matador.
Yeah.
Who the woman matador also is very famous,
groundbreaking, first woman,
and just a striking, very intense character in her own right.
Oh yeah.
Then we have
Benigno,
a ballerina who is in a coma. And then we have her caretaker, who's this very sweet, lovable kind of probably gay guy. Like, we don't really know yet, but he's doting on her, but he works at this hospital, right? Yeah. And he definitely cares about her because he's willing to take every extra shift humanly possible.
Oh yeah.
And that's 40 minutes of the movie. Yeah. We don't know anything more. No, what's interesting about this movie too, sorry.
No.
I'm like gushing, but
no.
But what's really interesting here is there are flashbacks, but the flashbacks don't happen for quite a while until these characters start talking about their lives and start ruminating and remembering things.
Yep.
So when we start into this movie, there's huge chunks that are just missing. It kind of reminds me of again, another Latin director. Why can't I think of his name? 21 Grams.
Inarritu.
Inarritu. Inarritu does that a lot too, where he kind of you think you've seen everything, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a flashback. I missed this whole piece of context.
There's different. He knows when he's cutting away from a conversation, right?
Yes.
Like you kind of get treated with two different perspectives of the same conversation. You're like, you see them pulling up and said, I need to talk to you about something or whatever.
And we're like, didn't they just meet?
Yeah, it had been a few months. They jump around. The time kind of jumps around a bit.
That's what I'm saying, though, is like he does not spoon feed that to you. There are a couple of moments where there are some...
But near the end of the movie, you see that same scene, but actually what happens in that car.
Yep.
Which is super important to kind of how he reacts to things and whatever.
Well, because sometimes he does give you title cards that say 4 years earlier, 3 months earlier, but sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah.
And so
Lydia and Marco.
And sometimes it hops back from its linear timeline to do a flashback, and we're like, is this a dream he had, or is he remembering something?
Yeah.
And I like that that's left loose. I think that's fun. That was fun for me as a viewer.
I think what you said about him treating you like a smart person is really that's really eye opening. I think because that's complete. I couldn't think of a way to describe kind of how he makes you feel as an audience member. Because even in Voltaire, there's stuff where you're like, okay, if you're smart, you can see the little breadcrumbs he's leaving here, right?
Yeah.
And he knows that. So pretty interesting to hear it in that context. I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, the characters here, Marco, like you said, a very, very emotional guy. Like, boy, he just breaks down like at a drop of a hat,
Yeah.
which is really cute. But it's Almodóvar does a really interesting thing about challenging relationships.
Yes.
What I can get from his movies is that he does not like men very much.
No.
And this movie is very much about two men dealing with certain emotions that you are kind of abnormal.
Yeah.
Maybe not to a degree, but like in this kind of like, vegetative state, it's kind of everything's in just kind of hovering, right?
Well, and it's and these two women, and let's just say that the Matador.
I forgot about the bullfighting part of this.
Lydia.
Yeah.
But it's gorgeous.
The slow motion, yeah.
The slow motion of the actual bullfight itself, which again, I think bullfights are fucking monstrous. I mean, I lived in Spain as a teenager with my dad on a military base, but
awful sport.
But this sequence, there are these almost Talmud-esque sequences, these rituals of dressing and undressing of our two main women leads here. One is this beautiful dialogue-less, almost music-less, also ritual of her putting on the Matador outfit.
Sure,
with
yeah.
the beautiful little,
ritualistic.
the little loop for the buttons with the little metal thing and all the frills, and we can hear the fabric kind of crunching and moving.
Totally paid attention to that.
It's a spellbinding moment. Then later we get kind of a mirror of that as they're bathing Alicia. And it's that's very much like the gown goes on,
and they tie the sides down that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's like, but again, it's the crinkling of the fabric in this very like loving way, dealing with fabric and these. It's so unique. Like I'd never really seen anything like that before. Now of course, what happens is Lydia gets gored by a bull, and she also goes into a coma, right? And that's when we go, oh, this is the crossroads where our movie actually intersects, and our four main characters are now together. Yeah,
I think the bullfighting, he's very much into tradition of his, of his home country,
of Spain, yeah.
And I think I think we see that through a lot of his stuff is just focusing, like making it a point to say, like, not even say it, but just show, like, hey, this is something you probably would only see if you lived with a Spanish family.
Yeah.
Right. And just the ways that just the customs like you're talking about there. Some of just things throughout his movie, and I'm thinking of Voltaire here too as well.
Yeah, totally.
But the let's kind of talk about the elephant in the room, or the character that is probably, I don't want to say most interesting, but he's a character that you kind of suffer with a little bit, right?
Well, you think
Benigno is who I'm talking about.
You think he is one thing.
Yeah.
And
I don't know, from scene one, you're kind of like, wow, he's really getting in there.
Well,
he seems really good at what he's doing.
But I think Almodóvar does something really interesting, which is we have an early scene where, yes, he is very doting on Alicia, and Alicia's father comes in, and they have this very tense, awkward conversation where her father is a therapist, and you understand from their conversation, he had come to see her father before the accident, and they talked about some stuff, and now he's sort of recalling that conversation and basically asks him, like, what is your sexual preference? Right? And he, at that point, he basically says, I think I'm more gay than anything else, and I have found somebody, and da-da-da. And in that moment, I remember kind of feeling like, what a prick this dad is. Like, just leave him alone. Like, this guy cares about what he's doing and cares about your daughter, and, and, like, he really believes in what he's doing.
So you felt for Benigno at the beginning?
I did.
Okay.
And then, once Benigno starts going into his flashbacks, from scene one of, actually, Alicia was a dancer across the street from my house. Right there you go, uh-oh.
That's not good.
Well, that can't be good, right? And then everything else from that, you're like, okay, how many more of these lines is this character stepping over? And I'll say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just like, what has he done at this point too, right? We don't even know what he's thought about or done, and he's been watching her for 4 years.
Exactly.
At the point that we've seen it, and obviously we can get to the ending at some point, but I don't know if you knew this, but Almodóvar based that character off of his good friend Roberto Benigni. Did you know that?
That makes me so happy. Anybody who's watched the show or listened to the old podcast we did knows how much I dislike Roberto Benigni.
Oh, we need to do Life is Beautiful.
We do, as a punishment review. But yeah, no, that's amazing. I had no idea. Now, I will say this. This is something really fascinating. After I watched this, there is a spell that Almodóvar does throughout this movie, which is why it was so hard to deal with Benigno's character. And it doesn't have to do with the horrible shit he does.
Yeah.
In fact, it's in lieu of the horrible shit he does. And it's because, and this is what Almodóvar, I started digging into some interviews with him. Mm-hmm. And he said, there was a couple of interesting things he said. One was, he said, I pass no judgment on the characters in my movies. And he said, because that's very uninteresting to me. And he's like, if we're going to create worlds, why do they have to be worlds that you've decided what the ethics of that world are? And he said, what's more interesting is to let those characters breathe, let those characters think, he's like, even if they're repulsive, let them talk and listen to them. Because if you do that, now you're creating something that has a lot more texture and it's way more interesting, right? Yeah. So he said that, and then I just want one other quote. I'm sorry. He says, Almodóvar believes all of his films are political, even the most frivolous movie, but claims he's never attempted to pursue outright political causes or fight social injustices in his films. Merely he wants to entertain and generate emotion. I'm not a political director. As a filmmaker, my commitment was to want to create free people, completely autonomous from a moral point of view. They are free regardless of their social class or their profession. And that's the magic spell that he does with this movie, where at the end of it, Benigno, you can be like, he's a rapist, he's an awful person, he's a stalker, like he took away this woman's autonomy.
Yep.
And at the same time you're like, but our other main character is lamenting and wanting to help him and wanting to say, like, it's so much more complex than just being like, and that guy's the villain.
Well, and the name of exactly, he's definitely the villain of the movie for sure, and it's easy to kind of go there. But
he creates all of the situations.
Yes, completely.
But he's a gray area.
I think it's really interesting that the name of the movie is Talk to Her, and that's Benigno's advice to Marco.
Yep.
To get into kind of how he should be emotional with her and talk to her and see what she needs. Who knows if she's listening? Marco sees no point in it. He's like, she's a vegetable, basically. And our female characters here are literally silenced through most of this movie.
Yep.
Lydia gets a little bit at the beginning, and Alicia gets a little bit at the end. But that's pretty much it.
Otherwise, they're blank slates.
Basically. And it's really interesting because if you look at a bunch of his other movies, most of the time the leads are female. Yeah,
they're women.
Almost all the time. So it's kind of interesting to swap that and then silence those women.
Yeah.
To kind of have the men deal with their emotions in
that is so interesting.
Creepy or loving ways.
Right. Well, and I didn't even think about this till you just said it, but that title of Talk to Her, yes, it is Benigno's advice to Marcos, but it's almost like, as a title, it's a misnomer because he's not talking to her. Yeah. He's talking at her, right? Both of these women are empty glasses that these men are pouring their hopes and dreams into. And in the case of Marcos, he respects her final wishes, which were to get back with her ex, And so he leaves her, and he's like, she's gone. Like, I don't, like, that was what she was going to tell me before her accident,
And that's what we find out in the car.
And Benigno thinks all of this love that he's put into her makes it a relationship.
Yeah.
That they get along better than most married couples do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it's like, and that it's, in that sense, he's more of a deeply mentally ill soul than he is just some out and out predator who's, you know what I mean? It's like there's something deeply wrong with him. I mean,
exactly.
he bathed his mother.
It's not on the surface at all.
He bathed his mother and did her nails and did her makeup.
Yeah.
And she wasn't an invalid.
That's a super important,
You're
that's
oh.
That's a super important thing that we find out in one of his flashbacks, right? And so relying on that is so interesting. I want to talk about one of these moments that makes Marco cry and almost made me cry, is this musical piece performance in the middle.
I think this is going to be another one of the staples that we see in Almodóvar's films.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, he loves performances. Like I was mentioning at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
this is one that he really focuses on. I don't know. I just wanted to see it really just kind of took my breath away. And this guy has the most beautiful voice.
It's
ever.
incredible.
It's angelic.
It's incredible. And it's so natural. And that was another thing that Almodóvar said in an interview. He said that he'll come up with scenes in movies, and he said, I'll attach a song to it. I'll be listening to a song, and I'll be like, that's that song. And that song that guy sings in this, that was the song for Talk to Her, and that was the one that he kept thinking about, and so he wanted it to be in that movie. And it's so natural, right?
Sure.
We have the nylon strings on the acoustic guitar, and then just a guy who's just sitting there pouring his heart out with, as you said, this heart-wrenchingly beautiful singing voice. And it's spellbinding. It's absolutely beautiful and romantic and sad and all those things at the same time. Yep. I love what Marco says, that what he tells Lydia, which is, part of the reason why I cry is because I have this failed relationship. And every time I see beauty, I cry that I can't share it with her. Mm-hmm. And you go, that's that same empty glass phenomenon, right? Like that's that same pouring out of the thing that you want to be able to share.
Interesting.
And they're not actually there to reciprocate it or take it in and give you their opinion of it.
Well, and remember, he kind of forces himself on her pretty quick, and he tries to become quick friends, like on the street, like he finds her wallet or whatever. Mm-hmm. Do you think he did anything to his mom? Because
I thought a lot about that after the movie, and this is another thing I think is probably going to be an Almodóvar staple, which I love, which is he sits on scenes of people talking, or people just reacting to one another, or people reacting to art, people looking out across a vista. He sits longingly on those scenes.
Yeah.
And then these scenes of great conflict or action are either never shown and talked about, or he starts the camera right off after they've happened, right?
Yep.
And so in this movie, and in fact, I'm amazed that we saw the bull gore Lydia. That's surprising.
Yeah.
I would have thought that we just see her in the hospital and they talk about the fact that a bull gored her.
Sure.
That seems more in line with Almodóvar, because a snake gets killed in this movie. We don't see it. A woman...
It doesn't show the violence.
A woman gets raped in this movie that becomes a pivotal point of this whole film.
Sure.
We don't see it. The same woman gets hit by a car. We don't see it.
Yeah, you're right.
There's all... And so we're left... part of me is like, did Benigno push her into traffic? Or did he chase after her? And she ran from him and got hit by a car. Right? It's left open-ended with all these questions. There's a suicide, and it's left off. Like, all of these things happen off screen. Well, and that happens again in Voltaire.
I mean, that's almost like a classic horror movie trope, right? What you don't see is worse off screen.
Yeah,
right?
because it just leaves you to think about it.
Yeah, he just has it come up in dialogue conversations or some obvious things. I don't know. Wow, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. He doesn't show any of it. That's really interesting.
It really is.
It's purely about, it's a character piece, of course, and it's truly about those emotions and getting those emotions. I guess let's just talk about this Benigno part where they find out she's pregnant. He plays it off like, what? She missed her period 2 months in a row.
And you're like, dude, you are not fooling anybody.
And you're the guy who checks her period.
Yeah.
Anyways,
you check her period. I mean, when you find out again through these flashbacks that he basically broke into her house and stole her hair clip. And then you think about the fact that he's sponge washing her. I mean, the level of violation feels like it couldn't get higher. And then you find out.
It feels like that from scene 1 with him, that like just how he's doing his job seems like, oh yeah, he's really good at that. But like,
yeah, it's actually, it's made me realize that like I must be a much more trusting moviegoer than you, because I was like, oh, this guy seems like a nice guy. Like that's
funny. You seem like someone who would definitely call out someone like that early on. Like,
I guess part of it is I don't know Almodóvar well enough yet.
True. That is true.
To know this, because that very first scene of the two men watching the play together, I was like, it was very tender, and so I went into it thinking, oh, okay, like I don't want to pass any aspersions yet because I don't know where this is headed. And if anything, Benigno seems like a much more kind of open, the actor has a very open face.
Yeah.
Compared to Marcos, who seems a little more rugged, and maybe he's a little swarthy or, untrustworthy. And really, he's the good guy here. He's the one who's pushing this story along. And boy, that the reveal. This is before that you realize the rape has happened, but the reveal of Benigno saying that he wants to marry her.
Yeah.
And you see it, and again, it's all in the reaction of Marcos to be like,
Marco's us.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Marco is us.
Like, she doesn't know you. Like, dude. Yeah, he's us. Yeah.
It's really interesting. The only thing I really didn't care about in this movie was the bullfighting stuff. Could be whatever. Like, in the El Nino is coming to take her. I just feel like that's a ploy to play with Marco, so we get to know Marco more. Yeah. That stuff I could have left whatever. Kind of funny he concentrates on that stuff, but not showing all that stuff you were talking about earlier instead. So interesting choice, but again, as we get to know him, maybe that will mean something. Really interesting movie. Seems like you really liked it. Yeah, it was just really different than anything I'd seen in a really long time, and I even felt like that those elements that maybe had less to do with the overall plot or story were still just so rich and interesting looking that I enjoyed myself. Yeah, his movies look beautiful. They're so colorful. They're just gorgeous looking. He doesn't have a ton of like establishing shots or anything like that. He cuts right to the meat of everything. It is stuck with me. I keep thinking about it. It's a very interesting movie. I don't necessarily like how it makes me feel. I agree. Yeah, I don't love the way that it makes me feel. Which is why I can kind of understand why people may not like first watch, something, I don't know. It seems like something, this one, maybe wait till your second or third Almodóvar movie. I mean, I would say, even with all of that being said, makes it interesting, though. It's so interesting. A lesser movie or a more Western movie would let us know from scene 1 Benigno is a fucking creep, right? It'd be played by like Steve Buscemi or something, or like, back in the day, Philip Seymour Hoffman, right? And you're like, oh, he's not, he isn't up to any good. But there's something instead where there's a strange fatalistic tenderness paid towards the character that makes it really unsettling in a whole new way I didn't even think about. Yeah, I think I mean, there's tons of unsettling shit in this movie when they're hanging out, like the Coma sisters, or like they're outside and they're like hanging out. These two gals talking to sunglasses each other. On and stuff. It's like, super weird, awkward. Yeah, the movie gets super awkward. I do want to talk about Alicia and kind of her ending to this, because she's really the most silent through all of these characters. We do get to see her what she's like in real life a little bit throughout the movie, but I feel like she's the one we know the least.
Yeah.
But she's also the most violated, and it just kind of had an interesting contrast there. I thought of how it ends up. Not only just that she's alive, and we don't really know if the baby is or not, or if they're just.
I think that I remember them saying that the baby is dead.
Yeah, okay.
The baby
Yeah,
is
that's
still,
where it's
born,
still
stillborn. Yeah,
stillborn.
And
That's right.
I thought, even though when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that's the only way this movie can end is if she wakes up. Really,
that's what I thought too. And then they even tease it more at the very end.
Yeah.
So
that you're like,
what is there?
Are they gonna
talk to her too?
Yeah. This time it's personal. Well, last time it was pretty personal too.
Yeah.
No, it's a very interesting movie, and again, it's a very
it's a weird one to talk about. I don't know. It's hard to frame kind of what I'm seeing, which is a sign of a good director, right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, that's the reason why I put in the quote of him talking about politics is because I'm like, he understands, like, whatever movies Almodóvar grew up on, what they made him feel must have been this magical thing, not necessarily of like Wizard of Oz, sweep me away to some magical land, but instead, like, again, makes you chew on stuff for days and makes you not entirely sure how you feel about things. And, I don't know how much of that has to do with like growing up in the 70s and 80s being a gay man in Madrid or not,
Sure, yeah.
but I mean,
being in a different culture too.
Yeah, like, I think that there's
what is that supposed to mean? Maybe you question that a little bit
right.
more.
And so those layers and layers and layers, I think, just made him go, oh, this is how I want to make people feel. I mean, it's less violent, but just as interesting and unsettling, I feel like, as something that Haneke might do. Right, where you're just left not entirely, just unsettled, and like it's gonna rattle around in your brain.
I was trying to think of someone close to, like, to compare him to, and that's a pretty good one.
Yeah,
I think, and he just goes there. Right?
Yeah,
he's able to go there and still kind of bring you back for the most part. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, because again, like you said, Marcos is us, and at the end, like,
everyone got kind of their comeuppance.
Well, Marcos is also completely taken aback and disgusted with what Benigno did, but he's still his friend, right? And you just go, there's something graceful and lovely about that, because most of us couldn't do that, right? And to have our main character be someone who's like truly laments when Benigno thinks that he's putting himself into a coma, but actually ends up committing suicide, and that you just go, this is so interesting. Like,
I missed that. He thinks he's putting himself in the coma.
He says, I hope I've given myself enough that I can join her. He can join Alicia.
I guess I thought he assumed she was dead and died from the birth, because he never got an update on how she was or what she.
Oh, maybe he did. I always took that to mean that he hopes he took enough to also be in a coma and be with her. But maybe it was that he was supposed to kill himself. Either way, it's like
it's fucked up. Yeah,
it's fucked up. But it's, I don't know, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, excited to get to the next one. All right, next one we were doing Voltaire, like we were talking about, and then we're gonna have a. Wall-E, that one
scene from Wall-E,
the opening scene. So we'll get into that as well. So, mix in some Disney with your Almodóvar, with your Spanish horror drama. So,
feel good movies.
All right, thanks for listening, guys. Please like and subscribe if you like what you see /hear, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, you guys.
See you.